Cisco Systems makes a simulator called Packet Tracer that allows you to do some interesting things with routers and switches. I have Cisco's Packet Tracer running on several computers in my lab, and we'll use Packet Tracer to look at configuring access control lists on a router. So I'm going to provide you with a little test setup here. This is just a file that I'm going to make available. I'm also going to have all the instructions required to connect to my lab and the IP numbers of the computers to use. For our first exercise, we're just going to use the computers here on the 275472 network and the ones over here on the 202.70.112.0 network. And I've got two routers. I've got one here that I've named Internet Router 0. At least on the drawing, I don't think I've changed the prompt on either of these. And what's going on here, I'm using the, let me get this back up. I'm using the fast Ethernet 0/0 interface to connect to the other router. Then I'm using the Ethernet 1/0 and 1/1 interfaces to connect to these networks here and here. And the same thing goes on over here with the router that I've labeled here, the company border router. Its fast Ethernet link goes to the router that I've labeled Internet Router. And the Ethernet interfaces, if I get right on that, it should open up. Well, that's close enough. The Ethernet 1/0 interface goes to the 202.70.112/0 or excuse me, .0/24 network up here, and the other Ethernet interface goes to this network down here. Now on if I click on this just with a forward click, I get a window here, and if you go to physical, this shows you the rear view of what the thing would look like. Now I've inserted this module here with 4 Ethernet interfaces. If you go to the config tab, there's a number of settings here. You won't have to worry about anything in here, I don't think. I've set up some static routes that will get packets from the internal networks to the over here on the left side of my drawing. I'm considering this to be the internet, and the right side is internal networks. So I've got the static routes that I think you'll need. I've also configured all the Ethernet interfaces, so we're all good there. I do want you to do some configuration here under on the company border router. You click on this tab that says CLI. This is the command line interface, and let me show you what it'll look like when you come into it. It should look like this. And let me warn y'all before we get started here, I don't do this every day, so I'm pretty rusty with my iOS commands. I keep meaning to study up and reobtain the CCNA certification that I had years ago, but I haven't got around to it yet. So I'll make mistakes. I've also made you some hints here, and I'll make this file available to you. Little things that I've discovered here while I've been playing around. So here's what I want you to do. we're going to configure some access control lists here on the company board or router. And first exercise, I'm going to put them on Ethernet 1/0. That's that particular interface. And this is, I'm going to put them in the out direction. We might come in later and do a little investigating what the implications are if we filter on the in direction, and maybe even on a different interface, but that's later. So I'm going to click on this, and notice it says here press return to get started. So if you got to make sure you click inside this window somewhere, make sure that it's got the focus, and press enter or return. And what you see here is the prompt, and by default it's just called router, and the little greater than sign here is part of the prompt. To get to the next level here, because you can't do much at this level, if you type EN, that's short for enable. So notice how my my prompt changed. Now I have the pound sign. That means I'm in enable mode. There's a number of things you can do here. If I type sh space run, it's short for show running configuration. I can go through here and look at everything that's currently configured. So all your show commands are at the enable level, which is somewhat frustrating, because a lot of times you'll make some sort of configuration change and want to see, make sure that things happen like you wanted it to, and then you got to go all the way down to enable mode, check it, and then go back out to wherever you were when you actually configured it. Most things are going to happen at the configure level. If you want to type it all the way out, it's configure terminal. I spelled that right. Notice how, again, the prompt changed. If I want to back down to the enable mode, I type exit. Now to get back up to configure terminal, I can do conf space T. That's easier to type. And most commands, there is a minimum number of characters you have to type for the router to understand what you're trying to tell it. So there are several shortcuts. You will find, of course, when you're doing ACLs, access control lists, that there are certain amounts of things you have to type out entirely. Alright, so now I'm in config mode, and configuring an ACL, there's a couple of things you have to do, or there's probably more than two. One of the things is you have to assign the ACL to an interface and also give it a direction. Now these top lines up here, I'm right here right now. I'm going to type in int space ETH1/0. Now this is short for interface Ethernet 1/0. And by the way, if you're wondering what the 1/0 is, the 1 is module 1. The built-in ports would be 0/something, and in this case, this is my first module, and the /0 here means the first port in my added module. So after I enter that, you'll see here in a moment that actually I'm going to just copy that while I'm here. When I paste this in, the prompt is going to change. So I'm going to come back over here, click there, and click paste. and then press enter. Notice how my prompt changed. And this whole concept of copying and pasting to and from your window here is it's a very useful way of doing things, especially when we get into the actual writing of the access control list entries themselves. So remember this concept. The now that I'm here, let's go back over here. This command here, the one that says IP access group 101 out, this is going to assign an ACL numbered 101. So the 101 is like an identifier to this interface that I'm currently configuring in the out direction. So I'm going to copy that and come back over to my router and paste it in. Press enter. Now usually if you don't get any error messages, it did what you wanted it to do. Now in this case the ACL 101 has been assigned to that particular interface in the out direction. Now currently there's nothing in access list 101, so that's going to be our next thing we're going to do here. So I need to get out of the interface. So you type exit, that brings you back to configure mode. Let's look back at our notes here. If you read this section right here, well, I'll read it for you. You will see that if you add a line to an ACL from the command line, it goes to the bottom of the ACL. Now there are some exceptions to this over time and in later versions of Cisco's iOS. They've made some changes to this. There are some things you can do to get things in order without having to go through the procedure that I'm going to go through here. But I'm going to go through the long way or the hard way or whatever, how you want to put it, with the assumption is if you learn it this way, if an easier way becomes available, you're okay. Anyway, alright, so most of the time we're configuring routers, you'll find the best thing you can do is to copy the existing configuration. In this case it's an ACL. You copy it, you paste it in a text editor. I'm going to use Notepad. Make your changes, and in this case it would be put the new line in the proper order in the ACL, and then you paste it all back into the router. Now before you do this, you need to remove the existing ACL using the command below, and this is the command. If you don't do this, it'll simply add what you've just edited to what's already there, and that's not what you want, of course. So you need to do this every time. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to copy this. Notice where I'm at. I'm just in config mode. I'm not in any of the interfaces. That's a bit confusing, I think. Paste that command in. And again, there's no error message, so I'm okay. Now, I've also got another Notepad window open here, instance. And this is where I was fooling around earlier. And this is probably a good thing. I'm maintaining this as kind of a scratch pad for things I've learned. And what you see here, these commands here are what I've done so far, experimented with. These are 3 different lines. Each of these commands starts out with access list 101, that identifies the access list that we're working on. The first two lines have a permit. That means let traffic through that matches a particular situation. Now, let's go up here to this first line. This one says allow TCP type packets from this network, 27.54.72.0. And if you look over here on the edge here, this is one of my public networks. The next part here is what's called a wildcard. You should have read about this in the one of the handouts, one of the links I posted for you. In the wildcard, everywhere there's a 0, we have to have an exact match. So 0.0.0.255 says we must have in the IP part here 27.54.72. The final 255 here, that's of course all ones. When there's all ones in the wildcard mask, that means we don't care what number's there. So the combination of this and this says any device using an IP number on the 27.54.72.0 network matches this. Now that's the traffic coming in. The next part is where does it go, or where are we going to let it go? When we say host, we're restricting it to one computer, and this is the computer we're restricting it to, the computer using that IP number. There are other ways we could put this if we wanted to specify a whole network, but host means just that one computer. Finally, we do equal, and in this case I'm using a I guess an alias would be a good way of putting this. I mean, I'm saying www. Of course that's going to match up to port 80. I'm pretty sure you could have put port 80 and it would have been okay. That's the first line. Second line, I'm specifying here again permit, but the protocol that I'm interested in here, the layer 4 protocol, is UDP. Again, anywhere on this, from any computer on this network, going to the same computer listed in the previous line. This time I'm saying equal 53. Now, hopefully you can look right at that and say, that's DNS. So I'm permitting packets from a particular network here going to either TCP port 80 or UDP port 53. Now I've added this third line here that says deny any type of TCP. Well, I deny TCP packets from any network. That's what this any says. To any computer that's on listening on this interface, equal port, again www. Now this says the combination of this rule and the first rule says, alright, we'll allow traffic to a particular machine but to no other machines. And if I'd have reversed the order on this, I wouldn't have got any traffic to web servers at all, because the ACLs execute from the top down. So you have to think about where you're going to put your rules. In this case, I want to allow traffic to web traffic to 202.70.112.10, but no other computers, no other devices that happen to be on that network. So, and I just did this for testing purposes. And currently I only have one computer on that network. I could add another one. I probably will here in a moment. Show you how this works. So I'm going to copy these and paste them right into the router. And notice I'm at the config prompt here. Paste. And notice how each line is entered, and then there's a new prompt, and I have to press enter here at the last one, and there's no errors here, so that looks good. Now let's see, just to check, is it really in there? I'm going to exit back down to the enable mode and do a show ACC, and this is short for show access list. And there's what I just entered. And if you're going to do a configuration, this is a good place to start, because you can copy this, put it in your notepad or whatever you're using, and then edit from here. But at this point I've got it got an ACL in here. So now let's test this. Now there is a certain amount of complexity here associated with using Packet Tracer, and I'm sorry, but I think you will find in the real world that often, or actually most every time I've ever did some sort of testing of a configuration, there is a certain amount of complexity involved in the testing itself that has nothing to do with what you're configuring. So you just have to kind of keep this in your mind. We're going to use, in this case, we're going to use Packet Tracer to simulate traffic on the network and verify that it does, our ACL does what we think it's going to do. Now, it would probably been a good idea, and I simply forgot, is before we started, to actually test our original configuration. And I think I'll actually go back and do that.